AITA for wanting to divorce my wife after she defended our teenage son who was caught bullying a poor classmate and downplayed his abuse as boys being boys. I, 38M, have been with my wife, 38F, for 18 years, married for 13. We had our son, 16M, before marriage, when we were still figuring out adulthood, but despite the rocky start, I thought we had built a stable life together. What connected us most was that we both had a strong sense of morality. My wife, especially, was always the type of person who spoke out against injustice. She despised bullies, stood up for kids who were treated poorly, and always talked about how she would never tolerate cruelty if it happened in our own household. Because of that, raising our son felt straightforward. We drilled into him the importance of respect, empathy, and decency. We weren't perfect parents, but we believed that if we gave him consistent love and guidance, he'd grow up to be kind-hearted. For most of his childhood, it looked like we were right. He was sweet, polite, and we never heard a single complaint from teachers or other parents. Our family life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. We had dinner together most nights. We talked about right and wrong openly, often using current events or news stories as teachable moments. My wife would shake her head at stories of kids bullying others online or in school and say things like, "If our son ever did that, I'd come down on him twice as hard as the victim suffered." I agreed wholeheartedly. We both believed kindness wasn't negotiable. So imagine my shock when the call came from school. It was an ordinary weekday afternoon when the principal asked us to come in immediately. My stomach dropped. I thought maybe our son had been caught skipping class or fighting. Never in a million years did I expect what we heard in that office. The principal laid it out calmly but firmly. Our son, along with a group of his friends, had been tormenting one of his classmates for months. The boy came from a low-income family and was being raised by his grandmother. According to teachers and witnesses, our son and his friends mocked him for not having real parents, stole the little money he had, and even took items he treasured. When he resisted, they physically assaulted him. Hearing those words felt like being punched in the chest. I remember looking at my wife, waiting for her to say, "There must be some mistake," but she just sat there stunned. My first instinct was denial. This couldn't be my son, the boy I thought I knew. But when I confronted him directly, he admitted to everything. He looked guilty, but in the way someone does when they've broken a window, not when they've destroyed another person's sense of safety. It was casual, almost dismissive, like he didn't fully grasp the weight of what he'd done. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of the victim. When the school had introduced us to him and his grandmother, the boy's face was covered in bruises and cuts. His grandmother's eyes were red and swollen from crying. She clutched her bag like it was the only thing holding her together. In that moment, my heart broke, not just for them, but for what it meant about my own family. Because the truth was undeniable. My son wasn't the boy I thought I had raised. Sitting in the principal's office, listening to the list of things my son had done, I felt like I was in some sort of nightmare. Every word landed like a blow. The stolen money, the treasured belongings taken away, the bruises, the mocking words about not having real parents. I kept waiting for someone to say, "We've got this wrong," or "He was just there, not participating," but the evidence was too clear. Teachers had seen it, other students had reported it, and most damning of all, when I turned to him and asked, my son admitted it. But the way he admitted it nearly broke me more than the act itself. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't even look scared. He said, "Yeah, I did it," with the same tone someone might use to admit they forgot to take the trash out. When I pressed him, "Do you realize what you've done to that boy?" He gave me this half shrug, like it was nothing more than kids messing around. My wife sat beside me, her face tight but strangely distant. I expected her to erupt, to lecture him right then and there, to match the anger boiling in my chest. Instead, she looked at him the way you might look at a child who'd come home with a scraped knee. Upset, yes, but not horrified. The school gave him a 3-week out-of-school suspension. They also told us the victim's grandmother was considering pressing charges. I thought I was going to throw up right there. When they brought in the boy he'd been tormenting, my stomach twisted so hard I had to grip the arms of my chair. His face was swollen, a cut near his temple still raw. He couldn't meet our eyes, staring down at his shoes, as though even looking at us might invite more pain. And his grandmother, God, she looked like she hadn't slept in days, tears running down her cheeks as she explained how her grandson came home crying, empty-handed, too many times. I wanted to sink into the floor. How could this have come from my family? From my son? I turned to him, desperate for something. Remorse, shame, even fear. But he just sat there. Maybe a flicker of guilt, but more like the kind you feel when you bump into someone on the sidewalk. Not the kind that belongs to someone who's inflicted real trauma. I grounded him immediately after he got home. Every device taken away. No leaving the house without supervision. No hanging out with friends. No privileges at all. It felt severe, but also inadequate. Nothing I could do at home could measure up to what he had put that boy through. The part that crushed me most was realizing my son didn't see it that way. When I tried to talk to him about the gravity of his actions, he rolled his eyes, muttered, "I said I did it. What more do you want?" As if a simple acknowledgement was enough to wipe away months of cruelty. And my wife, she told me I was being too harsh. She said I was acting like he'd committed a felony, when in her eyes, it was kids being kids. She scolded me for grounding him so thoroughly, saying it would only push him further away. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop picturing that boy's bruised face, his grandmother's tears, the way they both looked like the world had abandoned them. And for the first time, I realized maybe my wife and I were no longer on the same side of what justice really meant. The ride home from the school was silent. My son slouched in the back seat, staring out the window like this was just another boring afternoon. My wife sat stiffly beside me, her arms crossed, lips pressed together, as if she was annoyed, not devastated, not horrified, just annoyed that the school had made such a big deal out of it. When we got home, I didn't waste time. I gathered up his phone, his game console, his laptop, every device he had. I told him he was grounded, not just for a week or two, but indefinitely. No going out unsupervised, no hanging with friends, no luxuries. He looked at me like I'd just taken away his oxygen, but he didn't fight back much. He muttered something under his breath, rolled his eyes, and stomped up the stairs. His reaction only made me angrier. There was no fear, no shame, just entitlement. I turned to my wife, expecting her to back me up. Instead, she sighed. "Don't you think you're going a little overboard?" I stared at her. Overboard? He terrorized another kid for months. He stole from him. He hit him. That boy is covered in bruises. And you think I'm overboard? She shook her head. They're teenagers. They get into fights. They push boundaries. You remember how we were at that age. Boys roughhouse. They do stupid things. You're acting like he's some kind of criminal. I felt my blood boil. Because he is acting like a criminal. He robbed and assaulted another kid. That's not roughhousing. That's abuse. That boy's grandmother is considering pressing charges. Do you not understand how serious this is? Her expression hardened. You're making it bigger than it is. You've always been dramatic. He confessed, didn't he? He knows it was wrong. Isn't that enough? You don't need to destroy him over this. Destroy him? I repeated, my voice rising. I'm trying to teach him consequences before the system does. If he thinks this is no big deal now, what happens when he's 18 and it's not suspension, but jail time? He has to understand this is serious. But she wouldn't budge. To her, I was the villain for coming down hard, while she treated it like our son had scribbled on the walls with crayons. She even used the phrase that made my stomach turn. Boys will be boys. I snapped. Boys will be boys? No, boys will be whatever values we raise them with. And right now, you're teaching him it's okay to ruin another kid's life and walk away without guilt. That's when she shot back, her voice sharp. You're acting like some moral saint, but you're not perfect either. Stop pretending you know everything about raising a teenager. You're overreacting and making this whole thing worse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same woman who, years ago, told me that bullies deserve punishments twice as harsh as the pain they inflicted. The same woman who had always prided herself on standing up for the little guy. And now, when it was our son inflicting the pain, she was brushing it off like playground name-calling. That night, our house felt split in two. I sat downstairs replaying the boy's battered face in my mind, while upstairs my wife sat with our son, consoling him like he was the victim. I could hear their voices through the ceiling, hushed but clear, her telling him I was being too harsh, him muttering that I didn't understand. It hit me then. It wasn't just my son who had changed. My wife had too. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't recognize either of them anymore. The next evening, everything boiled over. I had spent the entire day replaying the scene in my head. The principal's voice, the bruises on that boy's face, my son's flat confession, and my wife's casual dismissal. By the time dinner rolled around, I couldn't hold it in anymore. We sat at the table in silence, my son pushing food around his plate without eating, my wife scrolling on her phone as though nothing in the world had happened. Finally, I broke the silence. He needs to apologize, I said, my voice firm. Not to me, not even just to the school. He needs to look that boy and his grandmother in the eyes and apologize for what he did. And he needs to mean it. My wife set her phone down and gave me a look that made my blood run cold. You're still on this? He already admitted it was wrong. What more do you want? Do you want to brand him a monster for the rest of his life? I slammed my fist lightly against the table, not to scare, but because I couldn't contain the frustration anymore. What I want is for him to understand the damage he's caused. That boy had bruises all over his body. His grandmother was in tears. This isn't some playground spat. This is cruelty, and you're acting like it's nothing. Her expression hardened. You're overreacting. You've always been dramatic. Kids fight. Kids mess up. He doesn't deserve to be crucified for it. I snapped. If it was our son on the receiving end, would you still be this dismissive? Would you tell him, oh, boys will be boys while he came home battered and robbed? Her eyes narrowed, and she spat out words I'll never forget. You're pathetic. You think yelling makes you righteous? All you're doing is making this house miserable, Maybe you should take a good look at yourself before preaching about morals. For a second, I was too stunned to speak. Pathetic? Miserable? Was this really coming from the woman who once prided herself on defending victims and demanding justice? I tried again, my voice lower but shaking. You used to say bullies should be punished twice as hard as they hurt others. You used to mean it. What happened to that woman? What happened to the person I thought I married? She scoffed, leaning back in her chair. People change. You're just too stubborn to see that. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with playing the hero, we could actually move on from this. But no, you'd rather destroy your own family over some kid that isn't even yours. That last sentence hit like a punch to the gut. Some kid that isn't even yours. As if that boy's pain didn't matter simply because he wasn't under our roof. As if empathy only extended to blood relatives. I felt the room closing on me. My son looked up from his plate just long enough to mutter, "Mom's right. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." And that was it, the final twist of the knife. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. If standing up for that boy makes me the villain in this house, then maybe I don't belong here anymore. She rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath that I won't repeat, and walked away with our son trailing after her. The sound of their laughter upstairs a few minutes later felt like a wall slamming down between us. That night, lying awake on the couch, I realized I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. Because it wasn't just my son who had failed, it was my wife. And maybe our marriage was already gone. The days after our fight blurred together in a haze of silence and tension. My wife barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words were clipped and cold. My son wouldn't even look at me. It was like I had suddenly become the enemy in my own house. One night, she finally broke the silence. She stood in the doorway of the living room, arms crossed, glaring down at me as I sat on the couch. "You need to apologize," she said flatly. I looked up at her, confused. Apologize? For what? For yelling at him? For treating him like a criminal? For tearing this family apart over something that kids will forget about in a few months? She snapped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Apologize to him? He's the one who terrorized another kid for months. He should be begging forgiveness from that boy and his grandmother, not me. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped into that icy tone she used when she wanted to shut a conversation down. If you don't make this right, you're going to lose both of us. The ultimatum hung in the air like poison. For a moment, I thought about giving in, just muttering some empty words to smooth things over. But the thought made me sick. Why should I apologize for demanding accountability? Why should I lower myself to pretend like this was some harmless scuffle? I'm not apologizing, I said firmly. Not when he hasn't even apologized to the boy he hurt. If you can't see how wrong this is, then maybe you're the one tearing this family apart. Her face twisted with disgust. She muttered a string of words I won't repeat, insults that felt designed to cut me to the bone. Then she turned on her heel and stormed upstairs. The next morning, she was gone. So was my son. She left a note on the counter that read, "Staying at friends. Don't contact us until you're ready to apologize." I sat at the table staring at those words, my stomach turning. My own wife had chosen to side with our son, the aggressor, over the child he had hurt. Worse, she had chosen to walk away from me rather than face the reality of what our son had done. The house was unbearably quiet without them. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that she'd cool down and come back ready to talk. But as the hours stretched into days, the weight of it sank in. They weren't just mad at me. They were united against me, convinced that I was the villain for refusing to brush this under the rug. I tried calling once, but she didn't answer. Later, I got a short text. "Don't call again until you're ready to fix this." The cruel irony is that I don't even know what fixing this means anymore. To her, it means apologizing and pretending everything is fine. To me, it means holding our son accountable and facing the damage he caused. Those two visions are so far apart, I don't know if they can ever meet. Every night since, I've sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty chairs around the table, wondering when exactly my family became unrecognizable. I'm not sure what's worse, the disgust I feel toward my son for what he did, or the heartbreak I feel toward my wife for enabling him. Because now, for the first time in 18 years, I can't picture a future where we're on the same side anymore. Now I sit here alone in a house that feels more like a stranger's than my own. My wife is staying at a friend's place with our son, and both of them refuse to speak to me unless I apologize. But the truth is, I don't even know what I would be apologizing for. For raising my voice? For demanding accountability? For refusing to downplay what was clearly abuse? I keep replaying the boy's face in my mind. The cuts, the bruises, the way his grandmother's hands shook as she tried to comfort him. That image haunts me more than anything. It makes me sick to think that my son caused that. And even sicker to know that my wife can look at the same evidence and shrug it off as boys being boys. The more I think about it, the more disgust I feel. Not just toward my son for what he did, but toward my wife for enabling it, for teaching him with her silence that cruelty can be excused if you call it roughhousing. And now, After 18 years together, I don't recognize her anymore. I don't want to live beside someone who treats trauma like a minor inconvenience. I don't want to raise a son who learns that empathy is optional. But I also don't want to throw away nearly 2 decades of marriage without knowing if I'm overreacting. AITA for wanting to divorce my wife over this? Or am I just being irrational for not being able to get past her indifference to our son's cruelty?